In this lab, we're going to explore tentative conclusions. We've been using the big green hand as a guide to help us know if we've been comprehensive in our thinking. And it's a non-linear approach, but it's iterative in the sense that it's developmental. And here we're coming to a place where we've been developing inferences. If this is true, then what's true? And a tentative conclusion is a particular kind of inference. If this idea is a good idea and we develop it, what are the consequences? Now, we've done some inferences about possibilities and probabilities, but this is a particular focus on the consequences of our idea. And consequences tend to come in various shapes. There's intended consequences. This is what our opportunity is. This is what we intend to happen. This is what we intend the result to be, midterm, short-term, long-term, whatever it is our thinking is. So we want to know and articulate what our intended consequences are. What are the unintended consequences? And this is where the inferential thinking that we did can really unearth a number of unintended consequences when we look at it from the diversity of points of view of all the people who are impacted, who are implementing it, who are communicating about it, all the people who are going to be in related areas around our innovation or our opportunity. So we want to know what are the unintended consequences, because the question is, who's going to take responsibility for that? What we've seen in the environmental world in the last 30 years, and even before that, is that there have been very effective and concerted efforts on the part of large industry to not want to look at the unintended consequences of their mining operations or their agricultural processes or their ag processes. They don't want to look at the unintended consequences on the soil, on the air, on the water, everything that is held in the commons, because they don't want responsibility for the consequences, unintended or intended, to those common resources that are shared by the public. And the public, represented by the government theoretically and by regulators theoretically, has been woefully inept in protecting the commons. And we're now experiencing this on a global level, but we are experiencing it simultaneously on a local and regional level and a national level as we look at our air quality, we look at our water quality, we look at the soil toxicity, we look at all kinds of unintended consequences of industrial processes that make it possible for us to have things, but are we paying the true cost? No. Because those costs of unintended consequences have been externalized on to the public. The people who have made money developing and maintaining those industrial processes are not taking responsibility for the unintended consequences. And the government has had a very difficult time trying to even get a piece of the resources back in order to remedy all the Superfund sites and all of the blanket toxicity that lives in our air, water, and soil. So let's look at our opportunity statement and what are the consequences internally for us. Mostly when we think about an opportunity, we're looking at how we're going to impact the outside world. But what are the consequences internally? Do we have enough staff? Do we have the right staff? Do we need specific skills? What kind of resources do we need? What are the consequences of us taking up this opportunity? And have we articulated them as clearly as possible and planned for them? Now we want to look at the consequences across industries. Now in a for-profit organization, we're looking at industrial organizations, or we're looking at business, or we're looking at finance. There are industries that are tied together in all kinds of different ways. And if we're going to take an opportunity to do something, we want to anticipate the impact of what we do, if we're successful, on the industry as a whole. This is a systemic approach. It's a responsible approach. It's what businesses say they're trying to be, is responsible corporate citizens, even though there's a lot of evidence that we're seriously struggling with whether we actually mean that or not. So in the nonprofit realm, I'm working right now with a group on homelessness. The homelessness providers, there are many other tangent or accessory or ancillary services that are being provided in healthcare, substance abuse, affordable housing, clothing, food banks. These are all part of the industry that's built up around homelessness. And we don't call it an industry. We call it partners, or we call it alliance partners. But essentially what we're looking at is, what is the impact if we do this thing, if we take this step? What's the impact across all of the related players in the field? Because it's our job to figure that out, to anticipate, so that we can work responsibly with the outcomes of our taking an initiative and moving it forward. We have to look at what are the consequences over time, and we've spent quite a bit of time in these labs looking at near-term, mid-term, and long-term inferences about our idea. And we want to continue to do that because we have to be responsible over time. Let's say what we do is not going to have much of a geographical reach in the near term, but in the long term, it's going to have a massive geographical reach. Climate, coal plants, all kinds of things like that. People can say, oh, well, yeah, we burned some coal, but it's not that bad. And it's only going to affect the air quality here locally. But over time, we're looking at a climate change crisis globally, because everybody's been saying the same thing. It's not really going to matter beyond my region and beyond right now. But everything aggregates, and the aggregation is part of the consequences. We want to look at the environmental impact of what we're talking about. Even in homelessness, for example, the environmental impact of putting a housing development or putting a clinic or putting all of that has to be considered with the broader environmental conditions in that region. So we can't just go, okay, well, this is a great idea, let's go do this. You're going to get smacked right in the head with an environmental impact report, with association and interest groups that are in the region who may or may not want it, with funders who are connected to those interest groups. All kinds of things come up. And those are part of the consequences of our taking initiative in a particular area. So what I like to do, I like to identify who owns the risk. And this is something that, if you want to be an innovative organization, not all innovations succeed. And if you're very cagey as an executive, or you're very cagey as a manager, and you want people to take innovative steps, but you don't want to own the risk, what you're basically saying is that there is no risk, that all innovations are going to be successful. And we know that that's not true. We know that some are going to succeed and some are not going to succeed. Some may be completely modified by the time they actually get on the road. But the question of who owns the risk, and are we openly owning the risk, this belongs, I believe, on the shoulders of the decision makers, the people who are putting their authority behind the innovation, and they need to do it openly and clearly. And if things go bad, things go bad. Not every innovation is going to work. And if you pretend that it is, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for people to be deceitful and to hide and to avoid assuming the risk, because it's the leadership who needs to make that decision and support the people who are taking the risk, because they're not the ones who are in a position to assume the risk. They're the innovators, but they need to be protected if you want any innovation at all. Okay, so what are we looking at? Once we start to identify the consequences, we're looking at anticipation. That's our greatest helper and friend, that we can anticipate using our inferential thinking, near, midterm, and long term, to anticipate the scope of the consequences and the risk, because that gives us a chance to redesign, to minimize the downsides, to minimize the negative consequences. It also gives us a chance to mitigate, which means we can negotiate with the people who are going to be negatively impacted in a way that we can mitigate their losses or their damage or the disruption that may come. It may not be an actual concrete loss, but if we go out and let them know this is what we're going to do, we think this might have an impact on you, we want to work together to try to mitigate whatever consequences might come to you, all of a sudden now you're acting as a responsible corporate citizen. Mitigation can come in all kinds of different forms. It can come simply as a phone call and an offer to get together and see how we can help reduce the stress or the structural changes that someone else is going to experience as a result of our initiative. We can offset what people, some of the consequences if we know about it ahead of time. We can set aside resources, we can make some of our people available, we can do things to help offset any negative consequences to our ideas. And we can help manage the transition in a responsible and a way that really evidences consciousness and kindness and respect, that we help the people who are going to be impacted by our idea, we help them manage the transition. Maybe we provide offsets, maybe we provide mitigation, but in any way, we're not just standing there saying, well, this is what I'm doing and too bad for you. We're saying, okay, we want to make a change. We want to bring this forward. Tell us how this is going to impact you as you see it, and let's see if we can work together. It doesn't mean that we're not going to move forward. It means that we're going to move forward into a cooperative ecosystem within our industry, and we'll get a reputation for being responsible and respectful. And when push comes to shove, our organization is going to be more resilient than those who just bludgeon their way through doing whatever they feel like doing. So, tentative conclusions, we come to a place we're going to have to decide, are we going to do this? And it's tentative because we want to stay on the balls of our feet. We want to be awake as the future is coming towards us and all the conditions in the operating environment are changing. And we want to be sensitive because we're going to have to probably make some midstream corrections. And that's inevitable in life and in business. And we don't want to pretend that that's not going to happen. We want to pretend and be on the balls of our feet. And yes, we're moving this opportunity forward, and we're awake as new information comes to us that we might have to make some shifts. So those are the important things around tentative conclusions when we're trying to formalize our decision. Is this idea a good idea? Is this opportunity a good opportunity for us now?